Sorry about that.
But then to kick this off, happy Friday. Happy Friday. Lovely to see everybody. Hope you had a great week. And this is the second time that, for now, it's called Governance Toolmaker Roundtable. Voice come together, which mainly describes quite active, experienced, and engaged community members from within the Cardano ecosystem coming together and, in the best case, figuring out important stuff, how to improve Cardano governance, tooling, services, platforms, processes, systems, structures, whatever it may, for the future. And today, short intro, we have Fabi from the Cardano Ambassadors, we have Michael and Vivek from Voltaire, we have Lloyd and Kyle from TripDrops, we have Lynn from Snaptoria, Darlington from Nation, Kenrick from Fortrack, Gator is a legend himself, nobody knows. And then we have Mince Otter AI, who is doing live transcribe on the meeting, which is awesome. And Natalie and myself from Swarm.
I'll share the notes, don't worry.
Wow, cool. Awesome. Happy Friday, and nice to see you as well, man.
Happy Friday, guys. Sorry I'm a little bit late. My meeting just finished. Awesome.
We're good. We're all in the same boat.
Exact.
Do we have an
And
agenda?
then, yes, it was posted on the Discord chat as well. I sent out some mails the last week, also before New Year, and Kator set up a forum on the CIP Discord. We could discuss that. I sent out a follow-up mail as well last week for agenda draft. Asked anybody to add. Let me share screen on this one. There we go. Main idea, and feel free to criticize, suggest, or whatnot. Main idea was simply having a Google document, open edit rights for everyone. It was sent out a week ago. And simply adding just times, and everybody could throw in what they think we should speak about. For now, we have mainly two topics. So one, this was added by myself, follow up on the previous conversation we had on the first meeting in December, where I said, maybe this group here might be extremely well skilled and set up to generate CPS or Cardano problem statements. And I would have some questions about actually how would we generate the CPS? Once take the lead of drafting documents? How would we ensure that everybody in the call is well aligned on the outcomes? Would we ensure high quality review? And how would we finalize and transform the draft into an actual official CPS format? And then the second part, whether this one was, what are the top risks for the Cardano ecosystem? And then the points how to best identify those risks, how to rank them in their priority, and how best to determine resources needed to mitigate risks. And we still have open slots. If you have any topics you would like to discuss, simply go for it. I put a link here in the live chat as well, in Zoom, where you can directly access. How does this sound so far for you guys?
All good so far.
Yeah. And it's 10 past the hour, so it's perfect time to start on the first topic there.
It's all planned, for sure.
Perfect planning, Felix.
No. Do we have other suggestions, other topics somebody might love to throw up?
Well, let's get through the first one because it's the most important.
Okay.
Right? That's why we're here, yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So in order to address which problem statements could be targeted first, I think we probably want to list those statements, from a high level possibly what those problems could be. Is it do we have technology gaps that we need to address? Do we have a scalability issue? KTORS, you did a really cool thread on Twitter the other day. Relevant to, you know, how the chain's being used in different ways. Is that a potential issue? Meaning, we've got a lot of NFT activity and that type of stuff, and maybe a lot of metadata heavy activity. Does that warrant, acceleration of a side chain to support those types of business initiatives, that type of stuff? And then, so like, what do you guys see as actual problems? Are we looking at it from a broader ecosystem, or are we going to isolate this specific to, catalyst improvements? What's the scope? So I guess these are some of the questions that I have too.
Sounds
Yeah.
good. Scope and
Or
gap
specifically
analysis.
governance, right? Because we're technically a governance roundtable, are we going to kind of limit it to that or expand outwards?
I think when it comes to gaps in general also, we might want to distinguish between things we can do as part of the ecosystem community and things that are kind of in the backlog of IOG, especially when it comes to scalability and so on. There are still a bunch of problems or challenges that IOG is supposed to address. They have supposedly a plan for some of them, right? Some things like Ouroboros layers might take 2, 3, 4 years to implement. So that means we need perhaps something in the meantime. And yes, so just generally speaking, there are things I think we can do as a community, and there are things that are expected from IOG as well.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point there. Cardano, the network is very decentralized. However, governance is not very decentralized, right? In reality, it's quite centralized. So how do we move towards decentralized governance in a way that doesn't break things? Because if we hand off all the reins to everybody in the ecosystem, pretty sure something will break immediately, because if the community has not been given opportunities to govern, let alone been educated on how to govern well, right? It's not going to lead to great outcomes right away. So I think education is going to be a huge part of this as well.
I think that's a pillar, though. That would be almost like a vertical by itself. Like that would be like, that's a huge area to tackle, right? Would just be the governance side of it. I mean, if we're saying which Cardano, problem statements to address, that would be its own vertical in a sense. Would you guys not agree to that?
Absolutely. The whole, how do you do governance at massive scale?
It's
right?
a massive, it's a massive thing. I'm not sure if that's the scope of what this group should be about. I think we should be looking at very specific gaps, like the gap analyses. Like, okay, here's from a technological perspective, primarily, here's everything we need to get there technically, and then we could say, okay, then maybe the social layer comes on top of that. What do we need to achieve all that? And then the infrastructure comes from there. And then it really comes down to saying, okay, like KTORS was saying, okay, this is supposed to be IO's responsibility. Is it so far out that we need to come up with some sort of makeshift solution in between, right? Or whatever. Is there a gap we need to bridge, and do we need funding for that and that kind of stuff? And then this can go back into governance when we say, hey guys, here's a lot of shit that needs to get done, and this is where funding needs to get directed. We're either not addressing it and that kind of stuff. And that can be data that can be driven back into the catalyst circle, or the people who are kind of looking at that and guiding, what budgets are needed by the community in general. Because I don't like to waste time. I like to get shit done. And so if we can really organize this in a good way, we can approach it from the right way. So I like that. Governance is one huge pillar. You
Don't,
know,
isn't
we could say technical debt or deficits is a pillar, but it really should be broken out and not just bundled into one thing. Because there's very distinct things that we need, technically.
well, and Felix, aren't you running another roundtable that has more of a focus on governance? Or what is the
No.
other, isn't there another, what is the other roundtable you have? I thought there was another one too, right?
This from the NFT Guild, but it's mostly really touch all stuff, standards, NFT verification, minting,
Okay.
whatnot, standards for really specific.
So I guess maybe then, let me frame the question better. Like when you set this up with the phrase governance toolmaker, what is the scope of this roundtable? Is it, what is the proper scoping of what we're gonna work on?
It's not up to me to define. That's the whole group here. I just came with the idea because I think really, and I believe that collective intelligence is far stronger than a single one. And you are all amazing contributors in this ecosystem. But for the scope and for the specific outcomes, I don't have any strong ideas. I think this, in the best case, would emerge through these calls and interactions here.
Okay.
No, and to follow on to these points, it's easier to communicate something, a concept, when we have a specific concept to communicate. So if we're going to focus on governance tooling and we're going to find gaps in the ecosystem that we can identify, then it becomes much easier to take that particular gap and communicate that and educate on that and do all of these other things, write problem statements, write CIPs if necessary, write different things to address the gap that we identify. So,
Well, and that's helpful, Lloyd, because I think that your phrase governance tooling is slightly different and I think provides actually clarity. So it's tooling for the governance. That's a good scope. I'm not trying to force that, but that to me is a little bit clearer because governance toolmaker, I wasn't clear what that meant. Whereas governance tooling, I understand that.
yeah, that's a vast ocean all by itself too. There's so many things
Yeah.
that we still need to build right now in that space. As much as we've already built and continue to build, there's way more to build in that one very specific area.
Well, yeah, and the distinction I was making, just to clarify that, is are we focused on governance of the tools that need to be developed? Or are we focused on tools that support governance? That's the question I have in mind. guess
I
for
come
the
as a
group.
builder. So as a builder, I think building.
I would vote for the latter.
tools. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's I'm looking at it more of like a airplane on a runway. And you've got to get the runway built as we're running, and we're catching a lot of speed. And so there's gaps. There's things that aren't there that entrepreneurs need to come to Cardano and succeed. There's a lot of shit. There's a lot of barriers to entry. And so that's how I'm looking at it. I can help contribute to whatever you guys want the focus of this group to be, but I think that's where the most impact will be from a Cardano perspective. Like if we can identify serious gaps in technology that we need to address and say, okay, here's some areas that nobody's really working on. We should really encourage funding in these areas or in that kind of stuff. I mean, I think that's maybe I'm off on the scope of this, I mean, what do you think, K-Tours?
I think governance and tooling are two very different things. Given the people here, I think we are more about discussing, as we said last time, gaps and how we can make the ecosystem better, which has in the end little to do with governance. I think also governance as it is today is relatively okay in the sense that there is room for discussion, there is room for inputs all over the community. The problem is that development is heavily centralized on the core components, but governance is kind of okay. And I think the SPO demonstrated that last time with the last update that everyone refused to install and sort of put IO in a position that where they were never before. That was a good thing, right? And it really showed that there is some form of governance already in place. So yeah, from the purpose of this group, I think just what we started a bit last time, which is identifying gaps and find things we can actually act on, even if it's just about writing a clear description of the gaps and then tell IO, hey, you need to address that. I think that's fair.
That's right, because
Um,
even if we make that public, people can see that, and that can inspire other people to go fill those gaps.
Yeah. So not so much have a focus on governance. I mean, there will be other streams of work related to governance for sure. But given the people around this table here, I think it would be better to just think about, we are all builders of the ecosystem. What would we need? What do we want to change? And I think once we have the entire table here happy with the state of the ecosystem, probably a lot of people will be happy too.
I like that.
Much agree. And also from my own perspective, governance is exactly what is happening here right now. Bunch of different stakeholders, different groups, different projects coming together, figuring out what can we do together for the ecosystem. This is how I would define pretty much governance actually. But very much agree that I think it was mentioned several times in this call now, really those gaps, right? Identifying gaps, figure out what actually can we do, which then would come back to this whole CPS thing as well, right? That we can say, oh, okay, this identifying gaps, wrapping it up, formulate it on a way that everybody can understand it, machine readable, human readable, has to be figured out how then. And those gaps are then, in the best case, maybe submitted as CPSs and presented as such then to the wider community.
Yeah, maybe for the sake of getting started on something, because this is something I tried to do back in July, actually. I'm not sure how many of you have seen the state of the developer ecosystem that went out during that time and how many participated as well. Just sharing the link here for those that haven't seen that. But it wasn't perfect because I think it lacked a bit of participation from key people in the ecosystem, but at least it highlighted a few interesting points, especially on the pain points and what people would like to see in the ecosystem. So perhaps it's a good just way to start a discussion. Take one of the the most mentioned points and see actually maybe reflect already today where we're at with those points and if there is something to do or not. That's just a suggestion, but not sure.
Well, and I was going to make a suggestion too, given what I've just heard, is that not today, but maybe in our next meeting, we could have one of the agenda items to just kind of clarify the mission of the group, like what we are going to do and what we're not going to do. And then once we've done that, maybe we just revise the title a little bit so it like clearly, that in a sense, Governance Toolmaker Roundtable is kind of a working title, but maybe we take time as a group to decide what a good name for this is, and a clear vision and mission statement so that we know what the boundaries are of what we're going to do and what we're not going to try to do.
Yeah.
Maybe there's some parts also can be handled async and offline as well, which we don't have to bring into the meetings. You say meetings.
Sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
No, but this was not specifically for your topic, Henrik. This was just general that we might have to figure out as well. What do we actually want to really address in these meetings? Because it's just 1 hour and time passed by quite fast.
Right.
And
Exactly.
what is stuff what we can rather handle on an async way, for example, through discussions on Discord or whatnot. Heitor, when you shared the link to the State of Cardano ecosystem, what would you envision there as the next step in regarding to analyzing, identifying gaps? Having a review on it and somehow then what would be your vision there?
Yeah, well, the idea was mainly to see if people here agree with the points that were mentioned in this thing, and whether or not they are still true today, and if there is something maybe to capture in the form of a problem statement.
It would be interesting to do this again and see kind of what the changes are over time, and see if that highlights anything, anything that might be improving or getting worse.
That's the goal. That's the goal.
Yeah.
We intend to run it annually, so there will be a new survey in June, July, in 2023, which could also be a nice task for this, I think, group, is to come up with questions that we want to ask the ecosystem that would help us identify those gaps and keep iterating like that. From the CF perspective, I found this survey already very helpful to kind of guide us in where we needed to put some effort in the ecosystem. And like the number one things that really appeared was the on-chain ecosystem, the Plutus platform and so on, that was really not friendly for many people. And it seems to be the main blocker that everyone mentioned. But then there will be other points, and there will be also more technical stuff that people don't necessarily foresee, like scalability and those kind of things. But yeah, could be a task for a future roundtable. Come up with questions to ask.
Yeah, I could see. I mean, I was just browsing through it here briefly. I remember taking this back this last summer, but yeah, I'd say it jives with my impressions of what developing in the space is like. And it would be the one thing for sure. There's a lot of free form answers in here, so it would be interesting to take those free form answers and do some analysis on those, because that might be very helpful to take a look at that and find in those the similar things, the things where people are saying are roughly the same thing, and that's going to identify some gaps that we can definitely, at least we're working with data, which is easier. Intuition's great, but data plus intuition's even better. So yeah, I would think mining through these open answers where people put their own answers in and looking for similarities to try to find areas to do. As you just said, K-Tors, it looked like, the access to the on-chain Haskell stuff is tough. Well, yeah, it definitely is. So, maybe there's some gaps in there that we can identify.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the developer, just even the skill sets, the leading skill sets, JavaScript, and so it's like, okay, that's interesting.
Right.
Opportunities to expose, people to help hook in the smart contracts up. That's interesting. There's an exposure there, but yeah, there's just huge barriers. And then some of the things too are like, okay, we've got concurrency issues. Do we truly have any decentralized apps running on Cardano today? Truly, and so we're looking at things that I know Andrew made some suggestions to IO that where we could potentially address this at the node level. And so there's things like that in does it truly matter, right? Like I think it does for certain applications. So I mean, these are things that we want to talk about too.
This is awesome data. I love this. First time seeing it actually. Thanks for sharing. Who do we reach out to if we're building a solution for some of these things?
What do you mean? You just build it and sell it.
You build an IDE to make Haskell and Plutus easier, or onboarding devs and all that good stuff. Like, it's nice to have it, but what do we do with it, right?
Do you have this raw data somewhere posted or anything, K-Tors?
Yeah, it's all on the GitHub. I've shared the link On the
Awesome.
the Markdown side is actually the raw data, and there is a JSON version of it, which is like the raw format.
Awesome. Yeah, this is great.
So what do you think we take this as action item that everybody here in the call takes already, let's say for the next 2 weeks, some time to read through the whole stuff?
Mhm.
So that we can make sure everybody's on the same page. We know well about the data we are speaking about then. Diving into anybody on the capacity he's able to, because you're all busy as hell for very good reasons.
Well, I'll take an action too to come up with a few problem statements or not statements, but just high level things that I think we could focus around. If you maybe do the same, come back with 1, 2, or maybe even 3 potential
Well.
problems we can compare and actually get down and narrow in a focus. And then I think that to Kenrick's point, that'll come back and really help us a lot what exactly we're here. I think this has been helpful though.
This would be awesome indeed.
Guys, is there anybody that I can reach out to? If we are building solutions to address some of this stuff? Or we don't have connections in this group?
Well, I mean, what are you trying to do?
Reach out for what? Vin?
So for example, we build an IDE to make Haskell and Plutus all preloaded. You don't have to set it up. And it's open source and so on.
I'm not sure.
One issue right there.
I don't understand. Lloyd, do you understand what he's saying?
Like you want someone to like just to reach out to kind of get the word out, or
No, I
to
understand.
collaborate and work together with?
I
Yeah,
understand what
exactly. Like,
Yeah.
we're essentially a bunch of tool makers here, right? And we built stuff, right? And some of this stuff that we build directly addresses some of the pain points that developers have while they're building or learning, whatever. And so, I think it's part of collaboration. The next step of building is getting the word out there, getting in front of developers to actually test it and see what else they may need. Right?
So like I guess you're saying, as we're going through this process, identifying a lot of these gaps, maybe we've actually solved a lot of these gaps internally, and it's just something that realizing that this is something that we need to be sharing with the rest of the ecosystem and getting it out there.
Right.
I think what you're touching here is really this marketing side of open source, if I can say, right? Open source does not end at making some code public on a repository. There is usually, building a community around an open source project and, inviting people to use it, encouraging people to build on it and so on. And there is a lot of things you can do to make your project open source and would attract people if you think you've solved one of these things and you actually want to share it with the community. So perhaps we can just have a chat if you want. I've done that exercise with Sunday Swap actually yesterday, because they want to open source a whole bunch of stuff and you just don't know where to start really. So I kind of gave them tips on how you can do open source and how you can go beyond just making some code public and expecting someone to notice it. That's usually it's not sufficient.
Cool. I'd love to connect, man.
Yeah.
Drop a link in the chat.
I think also this and I think you touched another topic there as well, which comes a lot from my perspective on documentation, because it's true, there are a bunch of problems and a lot of people and projects working on solutions, yet nobody knows it. and it's for the project themselves as their builders. You don't put the time into marketing and promoting the stuff you do because you build. So it's quite difficult to get the word out already and say, hey, these are problems. We are aware of them since years, sometimes maybe already. Solutions get built, they are already launched, but yet there's no way for anybody to easily access those solutions, right?
Well, we,
And
we
I
have
think-
we have the developer portal already, which is one first medium through which you can reach to the community of developer. And we've tried really to kind of centralize all the possible tools on that developer portal. So if you've built something and it's not on the developer portal, then just put it there. That's a first start. Then I think CIPs also gives some kind of visibilities, especially CIPs that are like addressing a very important problem from the community. Then it suffices in a way with quotes to be for that information to be relayed by influential people of the community, and usually the word spreads. And those people are usually monitoring channels like CIPs. So if you publish a solution as a CIP to a known problem, it will likely get known. But yeah, then we can also work on different things. I think the dev portal is kind of a good tool to put to put a bet on. If we have to give visibility to something, I would rather do it through the dev portal and see how we can make the dev portal maybe even more visible, because then it's only one thing we have to make visible because it gives visibility to all the rest. So it's sort of an easier problem to solve.
Cool, man. Yeah, open source marketing is not easy. So thanks for sharing all these resources. I'll definitely look it up and looking forward to connect.
Yeah, I'd say a big chunk of it's networking, and if you have stuff to share, share it with the group, and we could take a look at it. We may be able to use it, we may not be able to use it.
The other thing too is we got a GitHub, right? Cardano GitHub. So if you got a tool that's useful to developers, and developers are always going to have problems and questions, and if you can send a simple response, hey, here's a tool you can check out. If it's a great tool, it'll catch on real fast. So there's ways to market underground. But that's how I would do it if I were trying to market a tool to people. I'd look for where they were asking for help and try and be helpful.
Yeah, the Stack Exchange, for instance, also a good place for that. You can put alerts on specific keywords, for instance, and every time someone mentioned that keyword, you can jump in and, hey, I've got a tool for that.
There you go.
And the Cardano forum for discussions is also a nice place. And then with that, we are already on 5:15. What do you guys think about going to the next topic then, which was suggested, which might have actually a lot of overlap to the previous ones, because it's about what are the top risks for the Cardano ecosystems, and then 3 sub questions: how best to identify risks, how best to rank priority, and how best to determine resources needed to mitigate risks. Because I think when we speak about gaps, it naturally includes already risks as well, I think. So a bunch of
Yeah, I think so.
answers.
I put this in here, but I think it is overlaps quite well with what we've been discussing. And I agree, it's a kind of, what I was trying to get at is, gap analysis, I think, is one of the central things that this group could contribute to.
Well, depending on the gaps, I mean, not filling those gaps in a timely manner might be huge risks, right? Like in terms of scalability, when you're talking about, if we don't sort that out before the traffic catches up, and that's a huge risk for the ecosystem.
We got human collateral too, and that's another dynamic, and how that plays.
Yes.
By that, we're in a bear market, right? And
Mhm.
the Catalyst community's feeling that now, right? There's a strain on funding, and then you know, the building community's feeling that too, because we're fighting against the declining ADA price and revenue comes in ADA, right? So
Mhm.
there's a real human collateral issue that I see happening definitely in the builder community. A lot of projects out here today, and they're not going to be here tomorrow. And there's a lot of desperation in the air, and I can feel that. And so in that regard, some of our best builders may go away. And they may either go build on chains that are going to pay them money to go build, or they're going to have to go do what they have to do to take care of their families because the times are really tight. So that's another issue. And as that unfolds, or can we predict, does it matter? Does it not matter? I don't know, but it's a variable we need to consider, right? From a community perspective, from the churn. So if we're focusing strictly on the technology without the community to help execute that technology, that could be detrimental as well.
Also, I'd also love to hear just a little bit from everybody. So Vivek, Darlington, Fabi, what are your thoughts on the whole thing?
Yeah, I think so this is the first time I'm looking at this data set as well, and I think it is fantastic. I think it's a good starting place to figure out what the sentiment is in terms of gaps. I think I know this is we're looking at technical solutions where we can. From the conversation so far, it sounds like there's a communication slash like information distribution gap that needs to be tackled. Now, I know K-Torres, you've spoken quite a bit about what's in place, and I think it is more rallying the community to promote these portals and the locations where this information is located, as well as standardizing where we put information. Like Kyle mentioned GitHub. As you know, I know our developers, like our team, that's the first place that they're going to go. They're not going to really look too many other places first. And so there is, I think, and I saw it as one of the questions in the survey, but where do you look for answers? I think if we can, as a group, kind of guide that, or at least recognize where those top places are and put the information there, right? That's going to go a long way to helping. I think, and the more I'm hearing about this, more I'm thinking about it. It is an organization thing. It is where we're putting information.
Yeah, fully agree. And there is a reason why that question was there, really. I wanted to get a sense of that and see if over a year at least we can start migrating some of that. Ideally, I would like 100% of developers to answer developer portal when you ask them, when you go for technical information about Cardano, or scientific papers or stuff like that, but certainly not Twitter, YouTube, or whatever else.
Yeah, one comment on that is changing behavior is a paramount task. If it's aligning to people's behavior, then that's a more achievable task, right? So yes, we can train people and guide them, but we also have to keep in mind what people naturally do, and that's the challenge I'm sure K-Torres is you're facing on a regular basis.
Yeah. And as you say, right, if everyone is already fishing their information somewhere, we might as well just put it there instead of trying to change their behavior. But I think really the dev portal is kind of standing out because people are already kind of around that thing, but it doesn't necessarily have all the information they need sometimes. So perhaps it's just a gap in the documentation, and it's about adding it there so that people would feel completely at home, and they don't need to look for somewhere else. And perhaps it's also the way we present the information.
I like what the all the different things we've talked about today. I think the one that's sticking out to me is the one Kenrick and I think whoever Lloyd maybe mentioned of trying to figure out the identity for this cohort. Like what we would like to be doing, what kind of inputs and outputs, like what's our jurisdiction, some sort of focus. With the work we're doing in our role in the community, we sort of straddle this line of tool making as well as communication and like information dissemination. We've been plugged into the website and Twitter spaces and stuff like that. So we definitely can, if information dissemination is part of the identity of this group, that's definitely something we're able to help with. And then on the and then the other thing that's interesting that I'm very interested in is the data repository, like getting data in one place that is programmatically accessible for tool makers to present that however they present that, in however many different formats. One thing we started doing recently is just making people go learn about things, and then getting some hotkey for it. And we've gotten a lot of engagement from that and making it fun. And I think that's where some of that dissemination comes in. And, if data was presented in a way that could be built into little games and things like that. That's just one use case, and I sort of digress. But yeah, I like the identity direction of this group, and then this idea of data should go one place, and it should be structured data, right? So we can build on top of it. Yeah, so I don't know if we have next meeting on the docket, but what are the inputs and outputs? And maybe this is too developer-y, programming to think about, but what are the inputs and outputs for this group? I think would be a really good thing to get a handle on.
Well, I think we kind of all agree that we want to help solve problems, and I think we're coalescing around gap analyses, and so and then there's a big distinction between identity. So for inputs, I think we want to come in with ideas of what we want for identity, and we want to come in with examples of problems, specific problems that we want to solve, and then from there I think we can coalesce and identify the first problems to tackle, and with that'll come the identity.
Yeah, that makes sense, right? And then even like what kinds of problems or what kind of specific gap analysis should we be doing that this group might provide a solution to versus some of the other groups that are also, trying to build in the ecosystem.
Everybody brings what's most important to them and what they see as most prevalent. It's going to strike the discussion, and then we're going to identify through it, and we're going to come to an agreement on what we want to focus on, and that's who we're going to be.
Yeah, I think it's worth it.
We may end up forming two different groups out of this, and that's even better, right? Like if it's like okay, this if we come up with, you see what I'm saying? If it's that important, so
I think it's value in a future meeting, if not the next. The other one being a workshop style meeting that can maybe result in the what are we about situation.
Another question that comes to mind on this is, as a volunteer group, how do we frame the actions that come out of this group? Because there's value in just communicating and connecting, but ultimately you'd like to be able to put some action behind it, but action requires resources. And while we each kind of have our own resources for what we're trying to do in our own ecosystem, we don't really have resources as a group. So I'm wondering what people's thoughts are about that in terms of what the ultimate capabilities of a roundtable like this are.
I mean, I think if this is public and we identify clearly actions that need to be done and we publicize that, I believe the community will coalesce and do the work for us.
It's a natural place for someone who was looking for something that they might take some catalyst funding for, where they could take and run with one of these ideas. So there's avenues there. There may be other avenues as well, but that's just one, kind of obvious example. You get a CPS, it's there. It makes sense to work on it.
But we should deliver a CPS though, if we highlight one and we want to actually execute one. I think we should take the onus to do that if we're going to identify.
Remind me again, what is CPS? What do those letters mean?
I had to look it up. Cardano problem statement.
Okay, problem statement. I was like, what's the
If
The precursor of a
then
SIP.
it becomes a Cardano improvement proposal.
Power protection services.
And I think also about
Are you the muscle for that, Kyle?
I'm not a muscle, man. I'm little.
and I think also what is quite important, also can read to a topic what you said, rewarding people. I think there are two incentives. On one part, it's financial incentives, but also social incentives. And from my perspective, what is really crucial, we don't have yet funds, but to make sure all contributions and participations from the folks here are tracked offline, off-chain, as or on-chain. And we can always go back on a later stage and say, hey, this group, this participants have engaged in these topics, it's tracked, it's documented, and we have at least this in place. Yet, if we don't have any, let's say, financial incentives or funds because your time is extremely valuable and there has to be something. So, like said in the last call as well, I started to set up a Gitbook where I just capture a little bit the meetings. It's yet under the Catalyst Swarm, can be set up on our own instance later as well. You just put everything over. If anybody wants to have admin rights there, just ping me on Discord on CIP, and I send you an admin invite. And from first perspective, I would from now focus on now we have the recordings of the meetings, having summaries, identifying action items, and documentate it already properly. To make sure, okay, your guys' actions are at least not forgotten, they are not ignored, and nobody knows about. This would be, from my perspective, the first step. Making this also in a later stage then. Because even if you apply for any funds later, it's great to have already a bunch of stuff where you say, hey, this has been done in the past already. We are not coming with a fully from scratch, not even bootstrapped and whatnot. And Vivek, you have your hands up. Sorry.
Yeah. So in the spirit of exactly what you said, coming up with action items for next time and what we want to accomplish, I think so. From my side, we're going to be looking at the data provided and by KTOR's this survey and identifying, like, say, the top 3 of the things that we want to tackle. I think, if other people around the table did something similar, then we can have a list to address and actually put on paper and start working against. And then one thing that occurred to me was, if we can somehow identify the impact of solving that problem. So, I mean, we can come up with all kinds of problems, but if we identify the impact of that problem, then we know we can help prioritize when it comes to it. And that'll also be the why we should be tackling a certain thing, especially if we're going to be disseminating this information or communicating this to the larger community. If they know why they're going to be working on something, then they're more likely to be inclined to do it.
Maybe that's what it is. We come up with a spreadsheet of all the problems. We narrow it down to unique problems. Then we go through the columns and each one of us gives it a number of importance to us. And then we got a group consensus of how important the problem is as a group. And then we can kind of, if there's any, like, I don't know if that data, we can extrapolate any real you know, disagreements we can narrow into, but I think that's the takeaway. Everybody come back. We have homework, come back with problems.
Agreed.
I like that.
Well, thanks, everybody. I think, is there anything else, any other actions that we want to address?
I think the other thing that came up around, action items is, Kenrick, around, a potential new name or mission statement of this group as well. I mean, I think we're kind of coalescing around that gap analysis and whatnot, but maybe putting that to an actual mission statement or getting that down on paper would probably be a good exercise as well.
If we
Yeah.
can come with that, or somebody wants to write examples or whatever, and we can get that knocked out quickly, that would be awesome, because then we don't have to
Mhm.
spend any more time with it. I think we spent enough time kind of figuring out what we want to accomplish, at least from a high level.
Well, I still think it's good to have the discussion, so that's why I was suggesting it as an agenda item for next time. But then we don't necessarily have to put a lot of time into that, but then, part of what I hear too is that if, for instance, this group was producing these CPSs and then ultimately CIPs, that's a great outcome.
For sure.
And I think what makes quite a lot of sense in this format as well, it's quite a large group, and some have more focus and, let's say, desire for this, others for this. And for example, when it comes, for example, to say, okay, nailing out the mission or vision or scope, doesn't have to be everybody. Largely enough that those who say, hey, I want to commit to this, I engage in this, 1, 2, 3 people, go for it. Just communicate back to the team then what you come up with, build alignment around, and then I think this could work quite well as well. So we don't have to bring each topic all the time to the whole group.
No, I see what you're saying, but I like the idea, to Kenrick's point, we have to allow for the proper discussion forum, so everyone is contributing and is respected in that.
Yes.
But what I do see is what we can do is, if we identify problems, then we can break out into working groups, so we can have kind of like a high level, kind of like leadership discussion where we do have everybody involved, and then boom, we have workshops where it's focused. It's maybe 2, 3, 4 people. Boom, we go and we hammer it out. And you're right, Kenrick. There's no point in doing this if we don't come out with a tangible that we can't leave behind for the community, and it should be in the form of a Cardano problem statement.
Then maybe what Darlington suggested before, going for the next time for kind of workshop. So we would all hammer out a little bit.
Well, yeah. I mean, the way I see it is, let's come with all the problem statements. We'll identify common problem statements. We'll say, okay, here's the ones we want to tackle. And then from there, we're naturally going to be inclined to say, okay, you guys are more qualified to handle this one. We're more interested and qualified to handle this one. And then we can break it out. And that's the workshop group. So we look at the problems first, identify them all, and then we can say, okay, we'll pick apart who takes what. And then we can do things in parallel. And I think that would be the most effective use of everybody's time.
Yeah, usually when groups like these start, there's usually like a charter that gets ratified. A lot of research goes into it, what we're all about and so on. And then working groups start to emerge naturally, right? Because we all have resources, interests, and you already are doing stuff towards something. And instead of working in a silo, we can collaborate on stuff, right? Whether it's CPS, CIPs, open source, information. Yeah.
I have a hard stop, guys. Thank you.
Awesome.
Good to see you
Then-
guys. Happy
Yes,
Friday.
Thanks. Happy Friday indeed. Thanks a lot for everyone's time. Hope you have a lovely weekend. And
Thank
keep
you.
building, keep being amazing for everything what you do in the ecosystem. And yeah. Thanks a
Thanks
lot.
again, Felix, for
Hey, guys,
pulling this
thank you.
together.
Cheers.
Thanks a lot, Felix. This is great.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, guys.